I knew something was wrong when my bank called about a credit card I never applied for. It was a Tuesday morning in Gilbert, Arizona, and I was sitting in my home office trying to finish a project deadline when my phone buzzed. The number showed it was from my bank's fraud department. I picked up, expecting maybe someone had skimmed my debit card at a gas station or something minor like that. What I got instead was a woman named Jennifer asking me about a Capital One Venture X card that had apparently been opened in my name 3 weeks ago. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," I said, minimizing the spreadsheet on my screen. "I didn't apply for any credit cards recently." "Mr. Anderson Zimmerman, is that correct?" Jennifer asked, her tone professional but concerned. "Yes, that's me." "And you're saying you did not apply for a Capital One Venture X rewards card on October 3rd of this year?" "Absolutely not. I haven't applied for a new card in over 2 years." There was a pause, and I could hear keyboard typing on her end. "I see. Mr. Zimmerman, I'm going to need to ask you some security questions, and then we're going to need to file a fraud report. It appears someone may have stolen your identity." My stomach dropped. Identity theft. Great. Just what I needed when I was already drowning in work and dealing with the nightmare that was my homeowners association. After spending 45 minutes on the phone with Jennifer, freezing my credit, and filing reports with all 3 credit bureaus, I sat back in my chair and tried to process what had happened. Someone had my information. My social security number, my address, enough details to open a credit card in my name. But who? And how? I lived in a quiet planned community called Desert Springs, one of those master-planned neighborhoods that had sprung up in Gilbert over the past decade. Cookie-cutter houses with desert landscaping, community pools, and of course, an HOA that seemed to have nothing better to do than make everyone's life miserable. The president of that HOA was a woman named Patricia Dalton, though everyone called her Patty, and she was exactly the kind of person you'd imagine when you heard the word Karen. Patty was in her late 40s, had that specific haircut that all Karens seem to get, the one that's short in the back and longer in the front, usually blonde with highlights. She drove a white Lexus SUV and wore athleisure outfits even though I'd never seen her actually exercise. She'd been HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made it her personal mission to fine anyone and everyone for the smallest infractions. My own run-ins with Patty had been numerous. She'd fine me $200 because my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. She'd sent me a violation notice because one of my outdoor light bulbs had burned out and I hadn't replaced it within 48 hours. She'd even tried to fine me because my desert willow tree was supposedly 2 inches over the height limit, though I'd gotten that one overturned by pointing out that the HOA's own bylaws stated natural desert vegetation was exempt from height restrictions. But this, identity theft, that seemed extreme even for Patty. I decided to check my mail. It was around 11 in the morning, and the mail carrier usually came between 10 and 11:30. I walked out my front door into the dry Arizona heat. It was early November, but it was still hitting the mid-80s during the day. I opened my mailbox and found it completely empty. That was odd. It was a Tuesday. I should have had at least some junk mail or catalogs. I'd been getting a ton of political mailers lately. The presidential election was over, but local stuff was still going. There should have been something. I checked my mailbox again, peering inside to make sure nothing was stuck. Nothing. I looked up and down the street. A few other neighbors were checking their mail, pulling out handfuls of envelopes and magazines, so the mail had definitely been delivered. I walked back inside and made a mental note to check again later. Maybe the carrier had just skipped me by accident. It happened sometimes, but the next day the same thing. Empty mailbox, and the day after that. By Friday, I knew something was definitely wrong. I hadn't received a single piece of mail in 4 days. No bills, no junk mail, nothing. I called the post office. Desert Springs Post Office, this is Marcus speaking. Hi Marcus, my name is Anderson Zimmerman, and I haven't received any mail at my address in 4 days. I'm at 4782 East Sagaro Drive in Gilbert. Let me check on that for you, sir, I heard typing. That's strange. According to our system, all mail for your address has been delivered. Let me see if maybe there's a hold on your mail. I didn't request a hold. I see that, but there is a temporary forwarding order on file for your address. My blood ran cold. A what? A temporary mail forwarding order. It was filed on October 1st. All your mail is being forwarded to another address. I never filed any forwarding order. Where is my mail being sent? I'm not supposed to give out that information, but given that you're saying you didn't file it, this might be fraud. Hold on, let me get my supervisor. I waited, my heart pounding. A mail forwarding order, filed on October 1st. The credit card application had been submitted on October 3rd. This wasn't a coincidence. A woman's voice came on the line. Mr. Zimmerman, this is Sandra. I'm the postmaster here. Marcus told me about the situation. I'm looking at the forwarding order now, and I have to say this does look suspicious. Where is my mail being sent? I asked again. To 4721 East Sagaro Drive. That's just down the street from you, isn't it? I knew that address. I knew it very well. That was Patty Dalton's house. Sandra, I need you to understand something. I did not file that forwarding order. Someone forged it, and the address my mail is being sent to. That's the president of my HOA. She and I have had problems in the past. Oh my. Sandra's voice became very serious. Mr. Zimmerman, this is mail fraud, and that's a federal crime. I'm going to cancel this forwarding order immediately, but you need to file a report with the postal inspectors. This is very serious. She gave me the number for the United States Postal Inspection Service, and I called them as soon as I hung up with Sandra. I spoke to an inspector named Robert Dawson, and after explaining the situation, he told me he'd open an investigation immediately. Mail fraud is something we take very seriously, Inspector Dawson said. And if this person has been intercepting your mail and using it to steal your identity, that's multiple federal offenses. We'll need to gather evidence, but the first thing I want you to do is try to document what mail you should have received but didn't. Over the next few hours, I went through my records. I should have received my credit card statements for 2 different cards. I should have received my car insurance bill, my water bill, my electric bill, a statement from my investment account. I'd also been expecting a new debit card because my old one was expiring. All of that had gone to Patty's house. I made a list and emailed it to Inspector Dawson. Then I did something probably stupid, but I couldn't help myself. I walked down the street to Patty's house. It was just before 5 in the evening, and I could see her white Lexus in the driveway. I walked up and rang the doorbell. I heard her small dog yapping inside, and then the door opened. "Anderson," Patty said, looking surprised and not particularly pleased to see me. "What do you want?" She was wearing yoga pants and a loose tank top, her blonde, highlighted hair pulled back in a ponytail. She held her phone in one hand like I'd interrupted something important. "Hi, Patty. Quick question for you. Have you been getting any of my mail by mistake?" Something flickered across her face. It was quick, but I saw it. Panic. "Your mail? No, why would I be getting your mail?" "I don't know, but the post office said there's been a forwarding order sending my mail to your address." "That's ridiculous. I haven't gotten anything with your name on it." She started to close the door, but I put my hand against it. "Patty, if you have my mail, you need to give it back. This is a federal crime. Get your hand off my door, Anderson, or I'm calling the police." "Good, call them, because I've already called the postal inspectors and they are investigating mail fraud." Her face went pale, actually pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. I need you to leave my property right now." "Did you open a credit card in my name, Patty? Is that why you stole my mail?" "I didn't steal anything. Leave, now." She shoved the door closed and I heard the deadbolt click. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She was guilty. She'd done this. I walked back to my house and immediately called Inspector Dawson. He'd given me his direct number. "I just confronted her," I said when he picked up. She denied everything, but she was clearly panicking. "Mr. Zimmerman, I appreciate your initiative, but please don't approach her again. You could compromise the investigation, and if she's dangerous, you could put yourself at risk." "You think she's dangerous?" "I think she's committed multiple federal crimes, and people do unpredictable things when they're cornered. Let us handle this. I've already contacted the Gilbert Police Department, and we're working with them. We're going to get a warrant for her home and her financial records." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the things Patty had access to with my mail. My bank statements, my credit card numbers, my investment information. Everything. How long had this been going on? The forwarding order had been filed on October 1st, but had she been stealing my mail before that? I got up and checked my credit report again. In addition to the Capital One card I'd already found, there were 3 other inquiries I didn't recognize. Discover Card, American Express, Chase. All from late September and early October. She'd been busy. The next morning, Saturday, I was making coffee when I heard a commotion outside. I looked out my front window and saw 2 postal inspector vehicles and 3 Gilbert police cars parked in front of Patty's house. Neighbors were coming out of their homes, watching as officers knocked on Patty's door. I grabbed my phone and watched from my window. Patty answered the door, and even from my house, I could see her arguing with the officers. They showed her something, probably the warrant, and then they went inside. They were in there for 3 hours. I watched as they carried out boxes of documents, computers, and what looked like stacks of mail. My mail. I could see the address labels from my window. They were literally carrying out boxes of envelopes with my name on them. Eventually, they brought Patty out in handcuffs. She was crying, mascara running down her face, yelling something about how this was all a misunderstanding. They put her in the back of a police car and drove away. My phone rang. It was Inspector Dawson. "Mr. Zimmerman, we've executed the warrant. I thought you'd want to know what we found." I saw them take her away. "We found over 300 pieces of your mail in her home office. Bank statements, credit card offers, bills, everything. We also found evidence that she'd opened 6 different credit cards in your name, not just the one your bank caught. She'd been making purchases and having items shipped to various addresses, including a P.O. box she'd rented under a fake name. 6 credit cards. How much are we talking about?" Preliminary numbers show about $48,000 in fraudulent charges. "We also found mail belonging to at least 4 other residents in your neighborhood. It appears you're not her only victim." I felt sick. $48,000. What happens now? "She's been arrested and charged with mail fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and several other federal offenses. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be prosecuting. You'll need to work with the credit card companies to dispute all the charges. But since this is clear-cut fraud, you shouldn't be held liable for any of it. I'd also recommend signing up for an identity theft protection service, at least for the next few years." What's she looking at, sentence-wise? Mail fraud alone carries up to 20 years. With the identity theft charges and the dollar amounts involved, she's looking at significant prison time if convicted. And between you and me, the evidence we found is overwhelming. She kept everything. Spreadsheets tracking all the credit cards, shipping confirmations, everything. It's like she wanted to get caught. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged. Patty had been stealing mail from 5 different households in Desert Springs. She'd opened a total of 19 credit cards in various people's names and had racked up over $130,000 in fraudulent charges. She'd been using the money to fund a gambling addiction. Apparently, she'd been driving to Las Vegas every other weekend and going through tens of thousands of dollars at the casinos. Her husband, a quiet man named Tom who worked in IT, filed for divorce within a week of her arrest. He claimed he'd had no idea what she'd been doing. The HOA held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patty as president. A guy named Greg Patterson, who lived 2 streets over, took over as interim president. I had to spend hours on the phone with various credit card companies, disputing charges. Capital One was easy since they'd already flagged the card as fraudulent. Discover was also straightforward. American Express took more convincing until I forwarded them the police report. Chase was a nightmare because Patty had made several on-time payments to avoid suspicion, so their fraud department initially thought maybe I'd just forgotten about the card. Eventually, though, they all agreed to wipe the charges and close the accounts. The new debit card that I'd been expecting. Patty had activated it and used it to withdraw $800 from my checking account before my bank caught on and reversed the charges. In early December, I was contacted by an assistant U.S. attorney named Michael Richardson. He told me the case against Patty was strong, but they wanted to make sure they had everything documented perfectly. She's retained a lawyer who's already making noises about a plea deal, Michael told me over the phone. But we want to make sure we have all the victims' statements before we even consider any kind of plea. What would a plea deal look like? I asked. Given the severity and the amount of money involved, plus the number of victims, I can't see us going below 8 years. And that's if she pleads guilty to everything and shows genuine remorse. If she makes us go to trial, we'll push for the maximum on every charge. 8 years seems light for ruining 5 people's financial lives. I understand your frustration, Mr. Zimmerman. But 8 years in federal prison is no joke. She'll serve at least 85% of that sentence. No parole in the federal system, and she'll have a felony record that will follow her for the rest of her life. In mid-December, I got a call from Patty's lawyer. His name was David Chen, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to meet with him and Patty. She wants to apologize to you in person, he said. Absolutely not. Mr. Zimmerman, I understand you're angry, but my client is trying to take responsibility for what she's done. She's willing to plead guilty to all charges. She just wants the opportunity to apologize to the people she hurt. She had that opportunity when she decided to steal my mail and ruin my credit. Tell her I'll see her at sentencing. The trial was scheduled for March, but in February, Patty's lawyer reached out to Michael Richardson with a formal plea offer. She would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a recommendation of 10 years instead of the 15 to 20 she was facing if convicted at trial. Michael called me to get my thoughts. What do you think, Mr. Zimmerman? A guilty plea means you won't have to testify, and it saves the taxpayers the cost of a trial. If she's willing to plead guilty and serve 10 years, I'm okay with that, I said. I just want this to be over. We're waiting to hear back from the other victims, but I think everyone's on the same page. She's destroyed enough lives. Time for consequences. The plea hearing was set for February 28th at the United States District Court in Phoenix. I took the day off work and drove to the courthouse downtown. It was an imposing building with metal detectors and serious-looking federal marshals everywhere. I sat in the courtroom with the other victims. There was Margaret Foster, a retired teacher in her 70s who'd had $12,000 stolen. There was James Chen, no relation to Patty's lawyer, who'd lost his entire savings of $23,000 to Patty's fraud. There was Deanne Owens, a single mother of 3 who'd almost lost her house because Patty had maxed out cards in her name and destroyed her credit. And there was Robert Miller, a veteran on a fixed income who'd had thousands stolen. We all sat together, a silent row of people whose lives had been upended by one woman's greed and selfishness. Patty was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. She'd been denied bail because the judge considered her a flight risk. She looked terrible. Her hair had grown out, showing gray roots. She'd lost weight. She looked older, harder. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Helen Martinez, went through the charges one by one: mail fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, access device fraud, aggravated identity theft. The list went on. "Miss Dalton, do you understand the charges against you?" Judge Martinez asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Patty said quietly. "And how do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor, to all charges." "You understand that by pleading guilty, you're giving up your right to a trial?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand the penalties you're facing?" The sentencing guidelines call for 187 to 235 months in federal prison. 187 months. That was over 15 years. I saw Patty's shoulders shake and I heard her sob. "Yes, Your Honor," she managed to say. The prosecution and defense have agreed to a joint recommendation of 120 months. However, I'm not bound by that recommendation. I'll make my own determination at sentencing. Do you understand? "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Martinez set the sentencing hearing for April 15th and dismissed the court. As Patty was led away, she turned and looked at all of us sitting in the gallery. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw something there. Regret, maybe, or just self-pity. I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. In the weeks leading up to sentencing, I was asked to write a victim impact statement. I sat at my computer for hours, trying to put into words what this had done to me. The stress, the hours on the phone, the fear that my identity was still compromised, that someone else might be out there with my information. The violation of knowing that this woman, someone I saw at neighborhood functions, someone who was supposed to be a leader in our community, had spent months systematically stealing from me and others. I wrote about the credit card company that had refused to believe me at first. I wrote about having to put fraud alerts on everything. I wrote about the anxiety every time my phone rang, wondering if it was another bank calling about another fraudulent account. I wrote about how I'd stopped trusting people in my own neighborhood. April 15th came quickly. The courtroom was packed. All 5 victims were there, along with family members. Patty's ex-husband Tom was there, though he sat on the opposite side of the room from her. Several neighbors from Desert Springs showed up, including Greg Patterson, the new HOA president. Patty's lawyer called several character witnesses who talked about how she'd been a good person before her gambling addiction took over. Her sister testified that Patty had struggled with impulse control her whole life. A therapist testified that Patty had been diagnosed with gambling disorder and was receiving treatment. Then it was the victim's turn. Margaret Foster went first. She walked slowly to the podium, her hands shaking as she held her statement. "I'm 73 years old," Margaret said, her voice wavering. "I worked as a teacher for 45 years. I saved every penny I could so I could retire with dignity. When Miss Dalton stole from me, she didn't just take money. She took my peace of mind. She took my sense of security. I'm afraid to check my mail now. I'm afraid to open my bank statements. I wake up at night worried that someone else is out there with my information, ready to take what little I have left. She was crying by the end, and so were several people in the gallery. James Chen went next, talking about how he'd had to delay his daughter's college education because the fraud had destroyed his credit and emptied his savings. Deanne Owens talked about almost losing her home and having to explain to her 3 children why they couldn't celebrate Christmas properly, because Mommy's money had been stolen. Robert Miller talked about how, as a disabled veteran, he relied on a fixed income, and Patty's theft had forced him to choose between medications and food. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium, my printed statement in my hand. I looked at Patty, sitting at the defense table. She was crying, her face buried in her hands. "Your Honor," I began, "when I moved to Desert Springs 3 years ago, I thought I was joining a community, a place where neighbors looked out for each other, where people followed rules because it made the neighborhood better for everyone." Patricia Dalton was the president of our homeowners association. She was supposed to be a leader, someone we could trust. Instead, she was a predator. I detailed everything that had happened: the stolen mail, the credit cards, the anxiety and stress. The hours of my life I'd never get back, spent on hold with banks and credit agencies. "Miss Dalton didn't just steal my mail," I said. "She stole my sense of safety in my own home. She stole my ability to trust my neighbors. She stole months of my peace of mind. And she did it all while acting like she was better than everyone else, while writing me up for minor HOA violations, while pretending to be this upstanding member of the community. She's a fraud in every sense of the word, and I hope this court gives her the maximum sentence allowed by law." I walked back to my seat, my hands shaking with adrenaline. After all the victim statements, Patty's lawyer asked if she could address the court. Judge Martinez allowed it. Patty stood up slowly. She was still crying, her face red and puffy. "Your Honor, and to everyone I hurt, I am so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did. I was sick. I am sick. I have a gambling problem and I let it control my life. I let it turn me into someone I don't even recognize. I stole from my neighbors, from people who trusted me. I destroyed their lives for money that I just threw away in casinos. I hate myself for what I did. I think about it every day. I think about how I can never make this right." She turned to face us, the victims. "Margaret, James, Deanne, Robert, Anderson, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you'll never forgive me, and you shouldn't. What I did was unforgivable. All I can do is accept whatever punishment the court gives me and try to spend the rest of my life being a better person." She sat back down, sobbing. Her lawyer patted her shoulder awkwardly. Judge Martinez looked through the paperwork in front of her. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Patty crying. "Miss Dalton," Judge Martinez began, "I've reviewed the presentencing report. I've read the victim impact statements. I've listened to the testimony today. I've considered the defense's arguments about your gambling addiction and your expressions of remorse." She paused, looking at Patty directly. "You held a position of trust in your community. People looked to you for leadership, and you exploited that trust in the worst possible way. You didn't just steal money. You stole people's identities. You invaded their privacy. You caused lasting harm that will follow these victims for years." Another pause. "The sentencing guidelines recommend 187 to 235 months. The government and defense jointly recommend 120 months. I've given this considerable thought." My heart was pounding. 120 months was 10 years. Would she go higher? Lower? The court finds that a sentence of 150 months is appropriate in this case. That's 12.5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You'll also be required to pay full restitution to all victims, which based on the presentencing report totals $137,842.16. Do you understand the sentence? Yes, Your Honor, Patty whispered. You're remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down and it was over. 12.5 years. Patty was led away, still crying. Her lawyer looked relieved, probably had expected worse. Outside the courthouse, the 5 of us victims stood together in the Arizona sunshine. It was a beautiful spring day, warm but not hot yet. 12.5 years, Margaret said. Is that enough? It's more than the 10 they were asking for, James said. She'll serve at least 10 years and a half with good behavior, I added. That's a long time. Deanne was quiet, staring at the courthouse. My kids are 12, 10, and 7. By the time she gets out, they'll be adults. She'll miss everything. Her whole life, really. She chose this, Robert said firmly. She chose to steal from us. She chose gambling over everything else. Actions have consequences. We talked for a few more minutes, exchanging phone numbers and email addresses. We'd become a strange little support group, bonded by the crime committed against us. Margaret invited everyone to her house for coffee the following week. We all agreed to come. As I drove home to Gilbert, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. It was over. Patty was going to prison. The credit cards were closed. My credit was slowly recovering. The post office had put extra protections on my mail. Life was returning to normal. When I got back to Desert Springs, I drove past Patty's old house. It had a for sale sign in the front yard. Tom had moved out months ago, and the place had been sitting empty. The desert landscaping was starting to look overgrown. Weeds were popping up through the rocks. I pulled into my own driveway and checked my mailbox before going inside. There was a stack of mail waiting for me. A water bill. Some credit card offers, which I immediately shredded. A notice from the new HOA board about updated parking regulations, and a handwritten envelope with no return address. I opened it carefully, suddenly paranoid. Inside was a letter on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Dear Anderson, it read. By the time you read this, I'll be on my way to federal prison. I wanted to write to you because you were the one who figured it out. You were the one who called the postal inspectors. You stopped me. I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. I hate myself. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I'm glad you caught me. I don't think I could have stopped on my own. The gambling had taken over everything. I was drowning in debt, and every time I stole from one of you, I told myself it would be the last time. That I'd win it back at the casino and pay you back and no one would ever know. But I never won. I just kept losing and stealing and losing and stealing. You saved me from myself, even though I know it doesn't feel that way. I hope someday you can feel safe in your home again. I hope someday you can trust your neighbors again. I'm sorry for taking that from you. I'm sorry for everything. Patricia Dalton. I stood in my driveway, reading the letter twice. It felt surreal. An apology from my criminal. Part of me wanted to rip it up and throw it away. Another part of me understood that she'd needed to write it, even if I didn't need to receive it. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I'd keep it, I decided. Someday, maybe years from now, I might want to remember this whole crazy situation. Or maybe I'd just throw it out eventually. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I walked into my house and dropped my keys on the kitchen counter. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg Patterson, the new HOA president. "Hey, Anderson, heard the sentencing went well. We're having a neighborhood meeting next week to discuss some changes to HOA rules and procedures. We want to make sure something like this never happens again. Hope you can make it. And thanks for everything you did. You probably saved other people from becoming victims too." I texted back that I'd be there. Despite everything that had happened, I still liked living in Desert Springs. It was a good neighborhood with good people. Patty had been an aberration, a cancer that had been cut out. Things would get better. That weekend, I went to Margaret's house for coffee with the other victims. We sat in her living room, drinking coffee and eating cookies she'd baked, sharing our stories and our feelings. It was therapeutic in a way that talking to the police or lawyers had never been. These people understood what I'd gone through because they'd gone through it too. "I got a letter from her," I mentioned. "Patty. She wrote me an apology letter." "I got one too," Deanne said. "I threw it away without reading it. I don't care what she has to say." "I read mine," James admitted. "It just made me angry. She's in prison because of her own choices. She doesn't get to ask for forgiveness or understanding now." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I read mine too. And you know what? I did forgive her, not for her sake, for mine. I'm too old to carry around that much anger. It'll eat me alive. She's paying for what she did. She'll be in prison for a long time. I can let it go now." We talked for hours that afternoon, and by the time I left, I felt lighter. Margaret was right. Patty was being punished. The justice system had worked. I could move on. The following Tuesday, I attended the HOA meeting. About 40 residents showed up, way more than usually came to these things. Everyone had heard about Patty and wanted to know what changes were being made. Greg Patterson stood at the front of the community center meeting room. "Thanks for coming, everyone. I know the past few months have been difficult for our community. What happened with Patricia Dalton was a shock and a betrayal, but we're here tonight to make sure nothing like that ever happens again." He outlined several new policies. All HOA finances would be reviewed by an independent accountant quarterly. There would be term limits for board members. No single person would have unchecked authority. Background checks would be required for anyone serving on the board. "We also want to make it clear," Greg continued, "that the HOA board is here to serve the community, not to make anyone's life difficult. We're going to be reviewing all the fines and violations issued over the past 3 years to make sure they were reasonable and justified." That got a round of applause. Patty had been notorious for over-the-top enforcement of minor rules. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me to thank me for catching Patty. Apparently, word had spread that I'd been the one to discover the mail fraud and report it. "You probably saved a lot of other people from becoming victims," said Jennifer Burton, who lived across the street. "Who knows how long she would have kept going if you hadn't figured it out." I drove home that night feeling grateful that I'd caught the fraud early, grateful that the postal inspectors had taken it seriously, grateful for neighbors who cared about making the community better, grateful that justice had been served. Life slowly returned to normal over the next few months. My credit score recovered. I stopped getting the constant anxiety every time I checked my bank account or credit card statements. The fraud alerts on my accounts eventually expired, and I decided not to renew them. Patty was in federal prison in California, serving her sentence. She couldn't hurt anyone anymore. In June, I got a check in the mail from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was for $847, my portion of the restitution that Patty had been ordered to pay. Apparently, they'd liquidated her assets, including her car and some jewelry, and were distributing the proceeds to the victims. It was a small fraction of what she'd stolen from me, but it was something. I deposited the check and donated half of it to a local charity that helped identity theft victims. It felt like the right thing to do. Turn something negative into something positive. In August, Margaret invited the victim group to her house again. We'd started getting together monthly, and it had become something I looked forward to. We'd bonded over our shared experience, but more than that, we'd become friends. Real friends who talked about more than just the crime that had brought us together. That night, Margaret made dinner for all of us. We sat around her dining room table, eating pot roast and potatoes, talking about our lives. Deanne's oldest daughter had just started high school and was on the volleyball team. James's daughter had gotten into Arizona State University and would be starting in the fall. Robert had gotten a new service dog, a golden retriever named Buddy. Margaret was planning a trip to visit her son in Colorado. "What about you, Anderson?" Margaret asked. "What's new in your life?" I thought about it. "Honestly, things are good, really good. I got a promotion at work. I'm dating someone I really like. I'm not constantly stressed about fraud anymore. Life is back to normal. Better than normal, actually." "That's wonderful," Margaret said, smiling. "We all deserve some happiness after what we went through." We raised our glasses of iced tea and wine, toasting to new beginnings and second chances. As I looked around the table at these people who'd started as strangers and become close friends, I realized something. Patty had tried to destroy us. She'd stolen from us, violated our trust, caused us stress and anxiety and financial hardship. But in the end, she'd failed. We'd survived. We'd recovered. We'd found friendship and community with each other. We were stronger than before. In September, I got a call from Michael Richardson, the prosecutor. "Hey, Anderson, I wanted to give you an update. Patty Dalton filed an appeal of her sentence." My stomach dropped. "An appeal? Can she get out?" "Very unlikely. Her lawyer is arguing that the sentence was too harsh given her lack of criminal history and her gambling addiction. But honestly, I don't think they have a strong case." Judge Martinez followed the sentencing guidelines. The sentence was appropriate given the severity of the crimes and the number of victims. I'd be shocked if the appeals court overturned it. So, what happens now? The appeal will probably take 6 to 9 months to work through the system, but I really don't think you need to worry. Even if by some miracle they reduced her sentence, she'd still be in prison for years. This is just her lawyer doing his job, exhausting every option. "Okay," I said, feeling relieved. "Thanks for letting me know, of course. And Anderson, you did the right thing reporting this when you did. You saved a lot of people a lot of pain." After hanging up, I thought about Patty in prison, filing appeals, trying to reduce her sentence. Part of me felt a twinge of pity. 12.5 years was a long time. She'd be almost 60 when she got out, assuming she served the full sentence. Her life as she'd known it was over. But then, I remembered the fear and stress she'd caused. The hours of my life I'd lost dealing with her fraud. Margaret's shaking hands as she testified. Deanne almost losing her home. Robert having to choose between food and medicine. No, Patty had earned her sentence. She'd made choices, bad choices, and now she was facing the consequences. That was how justice worked. In November, just over a year after the whole ordeal had started, I got a letter from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Patty's appeal had been denied. Her sentence would stand. 12.5 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. It was really over now. I called Margaret to tell her. She sounded relieved. "Good, I'm glad that's finally finished. We can all move on with our lives now." "Are we still on for dinner this weekend?" I asked. "Of course. Deanne is bringing her famous enchiladas and Robert is making his apple pie. You're still bringing that wine you were talking about, right?" "Already got it." "Perfect. See you Saturday at 6. That Saturday, I drove to Margaret's house with 2 bottles of wine and a renewed sense of gratitude. I'd been through something traumatic, something that could have destroyed my finances and my peace of mind for years. But I'd come through it. I'd been vigilant. I'd acted quickly. I'd trusted the system, and the system had worked. And I'd found friendship in the most unlikely place, with 4 other people who'd been victimized by the same person. As I pulled up to Margaret's house, I saw the others arriving too. James with his wife Linda, Deanne with her 3 kids, Robert with his service dog Buddy. We all walked in together, carrying food and drinks, laughing about something Deanne's youngest son had said. Inside, Margaret's house smelled like coffee and cinnamon. She'd made her famous apple cake for dessert. We gathered around her dining room table, the same table where we'd sat a year ago, shell-shocked and angry, trying to process what had happened to us. But tonight was different. Tonight we were celebrating justice, celebrating friendship, celebrating the fact that we'd survived and thrived despite what Patty Dalton had tried to do to us. "I want to propose a toast," Margaret said, raising her glass. "To all of us. We've been through something terrible, but we came out stronger. We found each other. We found justice. And most importantly, we didn't let what happened define us. We're more than victims. We're survivors. We're friends. We're family." We clinked our glasses together, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. Margaret was right. We were family now, bonded by shared trauma but defined by our resilience and our friendship. As dinner progressed, we talked and laughed, sharing stories about our lives. Deanne told us about her daughter making the honor roll. James talked about his upcoming retirement. Robert showed us tricks he'd been teaching Buddy. Margaret announced she was going back to school to get her master's degree in education, something she'd always wanted to do. "What about you, Anderson?" Linda, James's wife, asked. "You said you were dating someone. How's that going?" I smiled. "It's going really well, actually. Her name is Deanna Oliver. She's a nurse at Banner Gateway. We met at a coffee shop a few months ago. I think it's getting serious." "That's wonderful," Margaret said. "You deserve happiness after everything you've been through." As the evening wound down and people started heading home, I helped Margaret clean up in the kitchen. "Thank you for this," I said, drying dishes while she washed, "for bringing us all together, for making something positive out of something so negative." Margaret smiled, her hands in the soapy water. We needed each other. What Patty did to us, it wasn't just about money. It was a violation, an invasion. We needed people who understood that, who'd been through it. I'm glad we found each other. Me too. I drove home that night feeling content. My mailbox, when I checked it, contained only the mail I was expecting. My bills, a magazine subscription, a credit card offer that I immediately shredded. Everything was as it should be. Inside my house, I sat down at my computer and looked at my credit report one more time. Everything was clean. All the fraudulent accounts had been removed. My score was back up to where it had been before Patty's crimes. Financially, it was like it had never happened. But emotionally, I was different. I was more cautious now, more aware. I checked my accounts regularly. I shredded everything with personal information. I'd set up alerts on all my bank and credit cards that would notify me immediately of any unusual activity. I'd learned from this experience, and while I wouldn't call it a positive, I could acknowledge that it had made me more vigilant, more careful. A few weeks later, in December, right around the anniversary of when everything had started, I got an email from Inspector Dawson. "Hi, Anderson. Wanted to give you a final update. Patty Dalton's case is completely closed. All appeals have been exhausted. She's currently serving her sentence at FCI Dublin in California. Thought you'd want to know. Thanks again for your cooperation throughout this investigation. Take care. Inspector Robert Dawson, Uspies, FCI Dublin. I looked it up online. It was a federal women's prison in Northern California, about an hour east of San Francisco. Minimum and low security inmates. Patty would be there for the next decade, at minimum. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at my neighborhood. Desert Springs looked peaceful in the late afternoon sun. Kids were riding bikes, people were walking dogs, someone a few houses down was hanging Christmas lights. It was a good neighborhood, a safe neighborhood. Despite what had happened, I was glad I lived here. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Deanna. "Dinner tonight, I'm off at 7. Your place or mine," I texted back. "Yours, I'll bring wine and dessert." As I got ready to go, I thought about how much my life had changed in the past year. I'd been the victim of a serious crime. I'd helped catch a federal criminal. I'd made new friends. I'd found love. I'd learned lessons about vigilance and trust and resilience. Life had a funny way of working out. Patty Dalton had tried to ruin me, to steal my identity and my money and my peace of mind. But in the end, she'd failed. I was stronger now. Wiser. More careful but not cynical. More aware but not paranoid. I'd learned that the system, for all its flaws, could work. That justice, while sometimes slow, could prevail. That communities could heal and people could recover. As I drove to Diana's apartment that evening, the December sunset painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt genuinely happy. Not just recovered, but happy. Patty Dalton was in prison, paying for her crimes. The 5 victims she'd hurt were healing, moving forward, building new friendships with each other. Life was good again. And when I thought about Patty, which wasn't often anymore, I didn't feel anger. I felt something closer to pity. She'd thrown away her freedom, her marriage, her reputation, her entire life for what? Some temporary thrills at a casino, some fraudulent purchases that she couldn't even enjoy. She'd gambled everything and lost it all. Meanwhile, I was free. Free to live my life, free to build relationships, free to enjoy my home and my community without fear. That was the real victory. Not just that she'd been caught and punished, but that I'd refused to let what she did define the rest of my life. I pulled into Deanna's parking lot and grabbed the wine and the cake I'd bought from a bakery. As I walked up to her door, I realized I was smiling. Really smiling. The kind of genuine happiness that comes from knowing you've survived something difficult and come out better on the other side. Deanna opened the door before I could knock, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Hey you," she said, pulling me in for a kiss. "Hey yourself," I said, handing her the wine. "Ooh, the good stuff. What's the occasion?" "No occasion. Just grateful for everything I have." She gave me a curious look but smiled. "Well, come on in. Dinner's almost ready." As I stepped into her apartment, leaving the past behind me and focusing on the future ahead, I realized that this was the real ending to the story, not a courtroom or a sentence or an appeal being denied. But this moment, right here, moving forward with my life. Happy, healthy, safe, and surrounded by people I cared about. Patty Dalton had stolen my mail, stolen my identity, stolen months of my peace of mind. But she hadn't stolen my future. That was still mine, and I intended to make the most of it. That was the best revenge I could ask for, living well while she lived behind bars, paying for her crimes. Justice had been served, and life, as it always does, went on.